The alarms begin as a routine containment alert inside a Vought research wing, but the response teams arrive to find guards calmly standing at their posts, while cameras show empty hallways where a man is clearly walking. Technicians rewind the footage again and again, watching doors open without hands and conversations happen between people who insist they were alone. Reports start contradicting each other within minutes, and supervisors realize they cannot tell which version of events is real. Somewhere in the building, Sosuke Aizen sits politely in a reinforced room, answering questions through glass, while the facility quietly stops trusting its own senses. Executives rush to reassure each other that everything is under control because the asset is compliant, cooperative, and exactly where they left him. Homelander watches from an upper floor, feeling confident that Vought has finally found someone manageable, someone who understands hierarchy and restraint. But small inconsistencies begin spreading through reports, footage, and memories, and no one can explain why their success feels slightly out of alignment with reality. This is only the beginning, and the people who believe they are in control have already lost the ability to prove it. Stay with this story and subscribe once, because what follows is not open conflict but a slow unraveling of certainty that no one inside this world can detect. The deeper this goes, the less anyone can trust what they see, and the consequences do not stop with Vought. The first sign that something is wrong does not come from violence, but from routine. A security supervisor at a Vought containment facility notices that 3 different camera feeds show Sosuke Aizen sitting calmly in his reinforced observation room, hands folded in his lap, answering questions from a researcher. At the same time, an access log records his biometric signature passing through a hallway 3 floors above. No alarm triggers because the system believes both records are correct. By the time technicians begin cross-checking footage, the timestamps have already begun to contradict each other. Inside the observation room, Aizen speaks politely through thick glass, answering each question with measured clarity. He shows no irritation at the constant surveillance, no discomfort at the sealed environment, and no resistance to the evaluation process. Researchers describe him as the most cooperative subject Vought has ever encountered. His tone is calm, his posture relaxed, and his eyes attentive in a way that feels reassuring rather than threatening. A named reaction comes from Ashley, who watches the live feeds with cautious optimism. She sees an asset that follows instructions, complies with testing, and does not challenge authority. Compared to the volatile egos Vought usually manages, Aizen looks like a gift. She reassures the executives on the call that they finally have someone who understands how to operate within the system. Meanwhile, a security team responds to the phantom access alert on the upper floor and finds nothing out of place. The hallway is empty, the doors sealed, and no one remembers hearing footsteps. One guard swears he saw a man in white robes turn the corner seconds before they arrived. Another insists the hallway was empty the entire time. Their reports contradict each other so cleanly that supervisors assume simple confusion. Homelander arrives at the facility not because he is concerned, but because he is curious. He wants to see the man Vought believes they can manage without difficulty. He stands behind the glass in the observation room and studies Aizen carefully, expecting arrogance or tension. Instead, he finds himself facing a composed figure who greets him politely and maintains steady eye contact without any hint of fear. Aizen thanks Homelander for visiting, speaking as if they are colleagues meeting in a conference room rather than a soup observing a containment subject. His words are respectful, his tone balanced, and his demeanor entirely unthreatening. Homelander leaves the room with a faint sense of satisfaction, convinced that Vought's assessment is accurate. This is someone who understands his place. In the monitoring center, technicians begin noticing small irregularities in playback footage. Conversations seem to skip half seconds. Guards appear to blink in unison across different feeds. A timestamp rolls backward by 2 frames before correcting itself. None of these issues are dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but they begin accumulating in quiet patterns. A named reaction comes from a senior technician who reports the anomalies to his supervisor, only to be told that system stress is causing minor recording delays. He accepts the explanation reluctantly, even though he cannot shake the feeling that the footage is not behaving normally. He replays one segment again and again, convinced he saw Aizen turn his head slightly when no one else in the room noticed. Inside the observation room, Aizen continues answering questions about his abilities, his background, and his intentions with gentle clarity. He does not exaggerate, threaten, or conceal information in obvious ways. Every answer reinforces the idea that he is transparent and reasonable. The researchers begin to relax in his presence, speaking more casually than they intended. By the end of the first day, Vought executives receive a report describing Aizen as low risk, highly cooperative, and psychologically stable. The recommendation is to move him from strict containment into monitored integration testing. The tone of the report carries relief, as if Vought has solved a problem before it began. As staff members leave the facility for the night, several of them recall passing Aizen in the hallway and nodding politely to him. None of them question how that is possible, because every camera still shows him sitting quietly in the observation room. The building closes with a sense of success, unaware that the first contradiction has already settled into place. Vought's decision to begin integration testing comes faster than their own protocols usually allow, driven by a confidence that feels unusually justified. The report describing Aizen's cooperation circulates through executive channels with approving comments attached, and clearance is granted for limited movement under supervision. Security remains tight, but the tone shifts from containment to evaluation. The facility begins preparing for a controlled demonstration of how Aizen behaves in operational environments. A named reaction comes from Ashley, who oversees the planning with visible relief. She speaks about Aizen as if he were a new hire being onboarded rather than a potential threat, emphasizing how smoothly he has adapted to Vought's structure. Her confidence spreads to others in the room, and the atmosphere becomes almost optimistic. For once, Vought feels ahead of a situation instead of reacting to it. Aizen is escorted through the facility by a security team that believes they are maintaining strict oversight. He walks calmly between them, hands loosely folded, occasionally commenting on the architecture or asking polite questions about procedures. The guards describe the experience later as strangely pleasant, as if they were accompanying a respected guest rather than a monitored subject. None of them notice that their formation subtly shifts to follow his pace instead of setting it. The demonstration takes place in a controlled simulation room where Vought tests SUPs, decision-making in crisis scenarios. Screens project a mock urban emergency while observers watch from behind reinforced glass. Aizen stands at the center of the room, listening carefully to instructions about what he is expected to do. He nods once and waits for the simulation to begin. What unfolds surprises everyone watching. Aizen does not rush, panic, or hesitate. He moves through the scenario with calm efficiency, making decisions that seem almost perfectly aligned with Vought's training models. Each action reduces collateral damage, stabilizes civilians, and resolves threats with minimal force. Observers begin whispering to each other about how precise his judgment is. Homelander watches from the observation deck, arms crossed, impressed by how smoothly the exercise unfolds. He expected resistance or unpredictability, but instead he sees someone operating exactly within the parameters Vought prefers. The ease of it reinforces his belief that Aizen understands hierarchy and control. He leaves the room convinced this integration will be simple. Meanwhile, technicians monitoring the simulation begin noticing that the predictive models are adjusting themselves in real time. The software, designed to respond to a SUP's actions, seems to anticipate Aizen's decisions before he makes them. They assume this is a sign of compatibility between his behavior and Vought's systems. No one questions why the system looks almost synchronized with him. A named reaction comes from one of the analysts, who remarks that Aizen's performance is the closest match to ideal outcomes they have ever recorded. The comment spreads quickly, adding to the growing belief that this integration is a success. The more they watch, the more convinced they become that they are witnessing something exceptional but manageable. The confrontation comes not from aggression, but from a moment of confusion. During the simulation, a scenario resets unexpectedly, and the system displays a civilian in two locations at once. Observers assume it is a glitch until they notice Aizen calmly interacting with both versions as if nothing is wrong. He speaks to one, then turns slightly and addresses the other without hesitation. Technicians scramble to pause the simulation, but the controls do not respond immediately. For several seconds, the room shows overlapping realities that no one can explain. When the system finally resets, everything appears normal again. The logs show no error, no duplication, and no interruption. Aizen turns toward the observation glass and asks politely if the exercise is complete. His tone is unchanged, his posture relaxed, as if nothing unusual occurred. The observers look at each other, unsure how to describe what they just saw. Someone suggests it was a visual artifact from the projectors. By the time the debrief begins, Vought has already decided to interpret the incident as a minor technical issue. The success of the overall test outweighs the strange moment that no one can fully explain. Reports emphasize how well Aizen performed and how seamlessly he followed instructions. As the day ends, Homelander passes Aizen in a hallway and nods with approval. Aizen returns the gesture politely, thanking him for observing the test. Neither of them acknowledges that multiple staff members later recall seeing Aizen still inside the simulation room at the same time. Vought's internal response to the successful integration test is immediate and enthusiastic, carried by a sense that they have achieved something rare. Executives circulate summaries praising Aizen's composure, adaptability, and alignment with corporate objectives. Meetings that usually focus on risk mitigation now center on opportunity, with departments discussing how best to incorporate him into controlled operations. The tone across the company shifts from caution to quiet pride. A named reaction comes from Ashley, who presents the test results in a morning briefing with visible confidence. She describes Aizen as the most stable asset Vought has ever evaluated, someone who seems to understand expectations without needing correction. Her optimism spreads quickly, and even skeptical executives begin to relax. For the first time in a long while, Vought feels ahead of its own narrative. Plans are drafted to involve Aizen in low-risk public operations designed to introduce him gradually while maintaining strict oversight. The language in these plans emphasizes supervision, monitoring, and data collection, reinforcing the belief that Vought is setting the terms. No one notices that the structure of the plan mirrors the way Aizen has already been moving through their systems. The company believes it is guiding him into place. Homelander receives a summary of the strategy and approves it without hesitation. He is satisfied that Aizen's behavior confirms Vought's control and sees no reason to interfere. The situation feels orderly, predictable, and entirely manageable from his perspective. His confidence reinforces the company's overall mood. Meanwhile, minor irregularities continue appearing in internal reports. Staff members recall brief conversations with Aizen in places he was never scheduled to be. Security logs show him entering rooms seconds before cameras record him elsewhere. These inconsistencies are filed as harmless errors, buried beneath more pressing work. A named reaction comes from a data analyst who notices that incident reports involving Aizen never quite line up chronologically. She brings it up to her supervisor, who explains that integration testing always produces minor tracking discrepancies. The explanation is accepted because it fits the narrative Vought prefers. The analyst returns to her work, uneasy but unconvinced enough to push further. During his first supervised public operation, Aizen moves through the scene with the same calm efficiency he displayed in the simulation. Observers from Vought note how civilians respond positively to his composed demeanor. He follows instructions precisely, speaks politely to everyone involved, and resolves the situation without any visible strain. The footage is labeled a success before it is even reviewed in detail. Homelander watches the recordings later and nods in approval, pleased that Aizen's presence complements the Seven without disrupting hierarchy. He sees someone who understands how to function within the structure Vought has built. The feeling of control deepens. In the monitoring center, technicians reviewing the operation footage notice that several camera angles show slight differences in Aizen's positioning at the same timestamp. The discrepancy is subtle enough to dismiss as perspective error. No one questions why the differences seem consistent across multiple feeds. A named reaction comes from Queen Maeve, who hears staff discussing how smoothly Aizen handled the operation. She remarks that it is rare for a new asset to integrate so easily. Her comment reflects the general sentiment spreading through the building. This is working better than expected. By the end of the week, Vought's internal reports describe Aizen as fully integrated into their operational structure. His behavior reinforces their belief that they have identified a controllable, reliable presence. The company begins planning larger roles for him with increasing confidence. As employees leave for the night, several of them recall seeing Aizen standing in the lobby speaking politely with reception staff. Security footage later shows the lobby empty during that time. No one finds this unusual enough to report because everything else is going so well. Vought's confidence turns into momentum as Aizen is assigned to a broader range of public operations across the city. Each assignment concludes with outcomes that exceed expectations, reducing damage, calming civilians, and resolving conflicts with remarkable efficiency. Reports from field teams describe his presence as reassuring, almost stabilizing in unpredictable situations. The more often he is deployed, the more Vought feels validated in its decision to trust him. A named reaction comes from Queen Maeve, who joins Aizen on one of these operations and notices how naturally people respond to him. There is no spectacle, no dramatic display of power, just a quiet sense of order forming around his movements. She finds herself speaking less during the mission because there is simply less to address. The experience feels strangely effortless. Meanwhile, internal data begins showing a measurable drop in incident escalation in areas where Aizen has recently been present. Analysts present these findings as evidence that Vought's oversight model is working better than ever. Executives take this as proof that their integration strategy is succeeding beyond projections. The numbers reinforce a belief that control has never been stronger. Homelander reviews the reports with approval, pleased that the system appears to be functioning exactly as intended. He sees Aizen's performance as confirmation that Vought can shape even the most unusual assets into effective tools. His confidence grows alongside the company. At the same time, small inconsistencies begin appearing in city surveillance networks that Vought does not directly control. Municipal cameras occasionally show Aizen passing through intersections where he was never scheduled to be. These sightings are dismissed as mistaken identity by local authorities, unaware that their footage contradicts Vought's official records. A named reaction comes from a city dispatcher who reports seeing Aizen on a traffic camera during an unrelated incident. When she checks the official logs and sees he was assigned elsewhere at the time, she assumes she misread the image. The thought does not linger long enough to become a concern. Billy Butcher notices the shift from the outside, watching how incidents across the city seem to resolve themselves with unusual smoothness. He does not know why, but he senses that something is operating beneath the surface of normal events. The pattern is too consistent to be coincidence, yet too subtle to explain. Vought interprets the city-wide improvement as the natural result of their refined coordination and Aizen's cooperation. Plans expand to include him in higher-profile operations, confident that success will continue at this pace. The company begins discussing long-term roles that place him at the center of their strategy. During one such operation, Aizen pauses briefly in a crowded street and looks around as if observing something no one else can see. Team members later recall the moment clearly, but footage from nearby cameras shows him walking straight through without stopping. No one can reconcile the difference, and no one tries very hard to. By the end of the month, Vought's internal narrative is firmly established. Aizen is proof that their system works perfectly when the right asset is in place. Their success feels so smooth that they stop questioning how it is happening. The city continues operating with a quiet sense of stability that no one fully understands. The patterns extending across the city do not remain local for long, because agencies outside Vought's influence begin noticing the same quiet improvements. Emergency response times drop without new policies being implemented. Civilian unrest decreases in areas recently touched by operations, and reports describe incidents resolving themselves before outside help arrives. Analysts in federal offices start tracing these changes back to a single name that appears repeatedly in overlapping reports. The conclusion forms slowly but clearly. Something is happening that Vought is not fully explaining. A named reaction comes from a Department of Defense analyst who flags Aizen's name during a briefing, pointing out how often his presence correlates with unusual stability. The observation spreads through intelligence channels, prompting requests for more detailed information about his role. Officials ask Vought for clarification in polite but increasingly direct language. The tone suggests curiosity turning into concern. Vought responds confidently, emphasizing Aizen's cooperation and the effectiveness of their oversight. They frame the city's improvements as proof of responsible management rather than anything extraordinary. The more they speak, the more they reinforce the impression that everything is under control. No one inside the company questions whether they are describing a reality that actually exists. Homelander hears about the federal interest and interprets it as validation of Vought's success. He sees the attention as recognition of the system he represents and feels no reason to be suspicious. From his perspective, this is simply the world acknowledging effective leadership. His confidence remains intact. Meanwhile, military observers request permission to accompany one of Aizen's operations as part of a routine evaluation. Vought agrees readily, eager to demonstrate transparency. The observers expect to see coordinated action and disciplined oversight, and that is exactly what they believe they witness. During the operation, Aizen moves through the scene with calm precision while soldiers watch from a distance. They later report that his presence seems to prevent escalation before it begins, as if situations lose tension in his vicinity. None of them can explain why, but they all describe the experience in similar terms. Their reports carry a tone of quiet admiration. A named reaction comes from one of the soldiers, who mentions feeling unusually at ease despite the chaos around him. He attributes it to Aizen's composed demeanor and the professionalism of Vought's team. The explanation feels reasonable enough to accept without further thought. Back at their base, the observers review their own footage and notice small irregularities. Aizen appears slightly out of position in several frames, and background sounds do not always match visible actions. They assume these are recording issues caused by environmental interference. The footage is archived without deeper analysis. Billy Butcher hears through contacts that the military has taken an interest in Aizen and recognizes the significance immediately. Governments do not study individuals unless they represent something they cannot categorize. He begins watching the situation more closely, sensing that this quiet attention could lead to larger consequences. By the end of the week, multiple agencies are requesting briefings from Vought about Aizen's role, behavior, and capabilities. The tone of these requests is respectful but increasingly insistent. What began as curiosity has grown into a structured inquiry that Vought cannot ignore. Vought welcomes the attention as confirmation that their strategy is working flawlessly. They do not notice that every report, every observation, and every request is built on perceptions that Aizen has already shaped. Their confidence grows stronger just as control begins slipping further from their hands. The inquiries do not stop at national agencies, because similar reports begin surfacing from overseas partners who have no connection to Vought's operations. Cities in different countries report brief periods of unusual calm during international events, where Aizen happened to be present for unrelated reasons. Surveillance logs from airports and public venues capture him in places where no official visit was scheduled. Intelligence analysts across borders start comparing notes and discover that the same name appears in all of them. A named reaction comes from a European security official who questions how Aizen could be recorded at a conference in Berlin, while Vought's logs place him in New York at the same time. The discrepancy is explained away as a mistaken identity, and the official accepts it reluctantly because there is no clear alternative. The report is filed without resolution, adding to a growing collection of similar anomalies. Vought receives formal requests from international agencies asking for clarity about Aizen's travel and assignments. The company responds with polished explanations, confident that the records they provide are accurate. Their tone remains steady, never acknowledging the possibility that anything is amiss. The more they reassure others, the more certain they feel of their own narrative. Homelander views the global attention as a natural extension of Vought's success. He interprets the questions as admiration rather than suspicion and feels no reason to intervene. From his perspective, this is simply the world recognizing effective management of a valuable asset. His confidence remains unshaken. Meanwhile, analysts overseas begin mapping incidents where tensions diffused themselves shortly after Aizen appeared nearby. The pattern is subtle but consistent, spanning multiple cities and unrelated events. Some begin describing his presence as a stabilizing factor, something that reduces chaos without visible effort. Others are unsettled by how difficult it is to explain. A named reaction comes from an intelligence officer in Tokyo who studies the pattern and remarks that it feels less like coincidence and more like design. His comment circulates through internal channels, prompting further analysis. The idea that events might be shaped invisibly begins to take hold in small pockets of discussion. Billy Butcher hears about the international reports through unofficial channels and realizes that the scope of Aizen's influence is far larger than Vought understands. He recognizes the signs of a system being affected at multiple levels without direct confrontation. The realization leaves him both wary and intrigued. During a joint international operation, observers from several countries watch Aizen work alongside Vought teams and describe the same sense of calm that domestic agencies reported earlier. They notice how situations resolve before escalating, how people respond to him with unusual trust, and how the operation concludes with minimal intervention. Their reports echo each other almost word for word. Back in their respective offices, these observers review footage and encounter the same minor irregularities that others have seen. Aizen's position shifts subtly between frames, and background sounds do not always match visible actions. Each team assumes their equipment malfunctioned and moves on. By the end of the month, international agencies are quietly tracking Aizen's movements as if he were a natural phenomenon rather than a soup under corporate oversight. They do not announce this interest publicly, but their internal discussions grow more focused. The pattern has become too consistent to ignore. Vought, unaware of how far the attention has spread, continues expanding Aizen's role with increasing confidence. They believe they are guiding his influence into productive channels while the world observes approvingly. They do not realize that the world is observing something entirely different from what they think they are showing. The resistance does not begin with accusations or alarms, but with individuals who start trusting their own discomfort more than official explanations. A handful of technicians, analysts, and field observers from different organizations notice that their memories of events do not always match the records in front of them. They cannot prove anything is wrong, but the feeling that something is misaligned becomes difficult to ignore. These people begin comparing notes quietly, discovering that they share the same unease. A named reaction comes from the data analyst at Vought who previously noticed inconsistencies in Aizen's timestamps. She reaches out to contact in a federal office and learns that similar discrepancies are appearing in their logs. Their conversation is cautious, almost embarrassed, as if admitting doubt in the system is more troubling than the inconsistencies themselves. The fact that someone else has noticed the same thing gives her a small sense of validation. Billy Butcher becomes aware of this quiet network through one of his contacts and immediately recognizes its significance. He sees how people are beginning to question the reliability of their own perceptions without understanding why. To him, this looks like the early stages of something much larger than corporate mismanagement. He starts listening carefully instead of acting. Homelander notices a different kind of resistance inside Vought. Staff members hesitate slightly before confirming details about Aizen's movements, double-checking records that never quite satisfy them. The hesitation irritates him because it suggests uncertainty where there should be clarity. He demands firmer reports, which only makes the unease more visible. Meanwhile, Aizen continues operating exactly as before, calm and cooperative in every assignment. He answers questions politely and offers no resistance to observation. His consistency makes it harder for anyone to justify their growing doubts, because nothing about his behavior appears threatening or suspicious. The more they watch him, the less they understand why they feel uneasy. A named reaction comes from Queen Maeve, who begins noticing small differences in how team members recall recent operations. She hears two people describe the same event in ways that cannot both be true. The discrepancies are minor, but they linger in her mind longer than they should. The escalation occurs when this small group of uneasy observers begins attempting to document the inconsistencies formally. They compare footage, logs, and personal notes, trying to find a clear pattern. What they discover is that every record aligns perfectly with itself, leaving only their memories as the point of conflict. The realization unsettles them deeply. Vought dismisses these concerns as stress-related confusion brought on by the rapid expansion of operations. Official statements reassure staff that the system is functioning normally. The explanation is accepted outwardly, but the quiet conversations continue in private. By the end of the week, the first real resistance has formed, not against Aizen, but against the assumption that what people see can be trusted. This resistance is fragile and unorganized, built only on shared doubt. It does not threaten Aizen's position, but it marks the first time anyone has begun questioning the reality he has shaped. Homelander does not notice the change in a single moment, but through a growing collection of small irritations that refuse to resolve. He begins finding reports about Aizen that contradict what he clearly remembers seeing himself, and the discrepancy lingers longer than it should. At first, he assumes staff are making mistakes, and he corrects them sharply. The corrections do not remove the unease, because the records remain consistent while his memory does not. A named reaction comes from Ashley, who watches Homelander's tone shift during briefings. He asks the same questions twice in slightly different ways, searching for an answer that matches his recollection. She reassures him with data and footage that appear perfectly aligned. The reassurance works on the surface, but leaves him quiet in a way she has not seen before. During a routine observation of Aizen in a controlled setting, Homelander is certain he watches the man remain seated the entire time. Later, he overhears staff discussing how Aizen walked through the facility earlier that same hour. He checks the cameras himself and sees footage that supports their claim. The certainty he felt only minutes ago becomes difficult to hold on to. Aizen, meanwhile, continues speaking with the same calm politeness he has always shown, answering questions without hesitation or defensiveness. His demeanor never changes, and this consistency makes Homelander's doubts feel irrational. He finds himself studying Aizen's face for signs of deception and seeing nothing but composed attentiveness. A named reaction comes from Queen Maeve, who notices how often Homelander watches Aizen now, not with authority but with scrutiny. She senses that he is trying to understand something he cannot articulate. The shift in his posture is subtle but unmistakable. The escalation becomes visible when Homelander begins testing his own perception. He positions himself to observe Aizen directly, then compares what he saw to recorded footage. Each time, the footage contradicts his memory in small, precise ways. The pattern repeats enough times that he stops mentioning it to anyone else. Billy Butcher hears through contacts that Homelander has grown unusually quiet in recent days and recognizes the significance immediately. He knows that uncertainty is something Homelander has never handled well. The fact that it is appearing without a clear source tells Butcher that something far deeper is happening. Inside Vought, staff begin noticing that Homelander asks for reports about Aizen more frequently, reviewing them alone instead of delegating the task. His need for confirmation grows even as the data continues to reassure him. The contradiction wears on him quietly. By the end of the week, Homelander no longer trusts his immediate perception as completely as he once did. He does not say this aloud, but his hesitation is visible in the way he pauses before speaking. The certainty that once defined him has begun to crack in a way he cannot repair. The first major decisions influenced by Aizen's invisible design happen without anyone recognizing that they are acting on incomplete perceptions. Vought executives approve new operational strategies based on reports showing unprecedented success and stability in recent months. Government agencies mirror these decisions, adjusting policies that assume Aizen's influence is predictable and beneficial. What no one realizes is that these conclusions are based on realities he has carefully shaped. A named reaction comes from Starlight, who notices how confidently leadership speaks about future plans that depend heavily on Aizen's continued presence. She senses that they are building something fragile on an assumption they do not fully understand. Her unease grows, even though she cannot explain why. Homelander watches these plans unfold with a strange mixture of approval and discomfort. He agrees with the logic presented to him, yet he cannot shake the feeling that something is slightly misaligned. The more structured the plans become, the more uncertain he feels about their foundation. Vought begins assigning Aizen to roles that require minimal oversight, trusting that his past performance guarantees future success. They believe they are expanding his responsibilities carefully, unaware that they are granting him exactly the freedom he needs. The company congratulates itself on strategic thinking. Meanwhile, government agencies start coordinating directly with Vought based on shared data that all points to the same conclusion. Aizen is a stabilizing factor in complex situations. Policies shift to accommodate his involvement in more sensitive operations. The system reorganizes itself around a perception he controls. A named reaction comes from Billy Butcher, who sees how quickly institutions are adapting to this new narrative. He recognizes that they are responding to patterns without understanding their origin. The realization confirms his suspicion that the real conflict is happening beneath the surface of events. As these decisions take effect, the city begins to operate with an efficiency that feels almost unnatural. Incidents resolve themselves with minimal intervention, and tensions that would normally escalate seem to dissolve quietly. People attribute this to improved coordination and leadership. Inside Vought, staff members notice that operations involving Aizen rarely require follow-up or correction. His presence appears to eliminate complications before they arise. This reinforces the belief that he is the most reliable asset they have ever managed. The escalation becomes irreversible when multiple agencies formalize long-term strategies that depend on Aizen's continued cooperation. Contracts, policies, and operational frameworks are rewritten with him at the center. The system now assumes his influence as a permanent factor. By the end of the week, Vought and government institutions are making decisions based on a reality that only Aizen fully understands. They believe they are guiding the future with confidence, unaware that they are moving exactly where he intended them to go. The change in public perception does not begin with outrage or celebration, but with a quiet sense that things feel slightly out of alignment. People notice that incidents resolve themselves before they fully understand what happened, and news reports describe events with a calm tone that seems unusual for the situations involved. Conversations begin including phrases like, "It felt like it was already handled," without anyone knowing why. The mood across the city shifts, in a way that is difficult to describe but easy to feel. A named reaction comes from Starlight, who hears civilians describe encounters where they felt unusually reassured without remembering why. She notices how often Aizen's name comes up in these stories, even when he was not officially present. The pattern unsettles her because it suggests influence that does not match the record she has seen. Vought interprets the public's calm as proof that their strategy is working perfectly. Marketing teams highlight the stability and efficiency of recent operations, confident that the narrative supports their success. They do not notice that the public mood is forming independently of their messaging. Homelander watches media coverage and senses that attention is shifting away from spectacle toward something quieter. He sees fewer dramatic reactions and more subdued commentary about events that would once have drawn intense focus. The change feels like a loss of energy he cannot restore. Meanwhile, individuals begin sharing stories online about moments where their memories of events do not quite match what they later read or watched. These accounts are dismissed as confusion or exaggeration, but they appear often enough to form a pattern. The public does not panic, but a subtle doubt begins to circulate. A named reaction comes from a journalist who tries to investigate these stories and finds that every official record contradicts the witnesses in small, precise ways. She cannot prove anything is wrong, but the repetition of these discrepancies leaves her unsettled. Her article raises questions without offering answers. Billy Butcher reads the article and recognizes the significance immediately. He understands that when people begin doubting their own recollections, something fundamental is shifting. This is not a scandal or a conflict. It is a change in how reality is experienced. The escalation becomes visible when public trust in recorded footage starts to waver slightly. People begin questioning videos that once would have been accepted without hesitation. The idea that perception might not be reliable spreads quietly, without anyone knowing where it began. By the end of the week, the city feels different to its own residents. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet the sense of certainty that once defined daily life has softened. Aizen continues moving through operations with calm composure, unaware in appearance that the world is beginning to question itself around him. The effort to restore certainty begins with formal reviews that are meant to reassure rather than investigate. Vought, government agencies, and independent analysts all initiate audits of their systems, convinced that a technical or procedural issue must explain the growing sense of inconsistency. Teams are assembled to cross-check footage, logs, and testimonies with renewed attention to detail. The goal is simple: prove that reality is functioning as expected. A named reaction comes from the Vought data analyst who had first noticed timestamp discrepancies weeks earlier. She is assigned to one of these review teams and feels a quiet sense of validation that her concerns are finally being taken seriously. As she compares records again, she finds that everything aligns perfectly, more perfectly than before. The lack of error is almost more unsettling than the earlier inconsistencies. Homelander observes the process from a distance, expecting the reviews to resolve his lingering doubts. He waits for confirmation that what he remembers is supported by evidence. Instead, he finds himself staring at reports that contradict his recollections with calm, undeniable precision. The certainty he hoped to regain slips further away. Aizen continues cooperating fully with every review, answering questions politely and offering no resistance to scrutiny. His calm demeanor reassures investigators, making it difficult to justify suspicion. The more they examine him, the more reasonable he appears. A named reaction comes from Queen Maeve, who watches the review process and notices how tense the investigators seem despite finding nothing wrong. She realizes that they are not searching for problems anymore, but for reassurance that they have not lost control. The realization lingers in her mind. Billy Butcher hears about the audits and recognizes the pattern of institutions trying to confirm something that cannot be measured. He understands that when systems begin questioning their own records, the issue is no longer technical. The problem lies in perception itself. The escalation occurs when the review teams conclude unanimously that no irregularities exist in the data. Their findings are technically correct, but they do nothing to ease the unease spreading through the organizations. Officially, everything is normal. Unofficially, no one feels convinced. By the end of the week, the audits have failed to restore confidence. Institutions now know that their systems are accurate, yet they cannot shake the feeling that something is wrong. The attempt to reclaim certainty has only highlighted how little control they truly have. The final shift does not arrive with an event anyone can point to, but with a quiet acceptance that certainty is no longer something institutions can guarantee. Meetings continue, reports are filed, and operations proceed as scheduled, yet the tone in every room has changed. People speak more carefully, double-check their words, and hesitate before confirming what they think they saw. The world still functions, but it does so with a new awareness that perception itself might be unreliable. Inside Vought, executives stop trying to restore the old narrative and begin discussing how to operate in a landscape where control cannot be proven. Policies are rewritten to emphasize flexibility rather than oversight, acknowledging indirectly that oversight has limits. The company that once defined reality through media and authority now adapts to a reality it cannot fully grasp. A named reaction comes from Queen Maeve, who walks through the building and senses that the tension she once felt has been replaced by something quieter and more uncertain. She realizes that no one is pretending everything is normal anymore. This acceptance feels like a permanent change. Homelander moves through the halls with a subdued presence, no longer projecting the same unquestioned confidence. He watches people interact with Aizen calmly and realizes that the man's influence has not been loud or forceful, but absolute in its subtlety. The loss of certainty has reshaped how he sees his own place in the world. Billy Butcher observes from the outside and understands that the system he fought for years has been altered without a single battle. The structures are still standing, but they no longer command the same trust. The change is psychological and therefore irreversible. Aizen continues his work exactly as before, polite, cooperative, and composed. He never claims responsibility for what has happened, and no one can point to a moment where he took control. His presence remains reassuring and unsettling at the same time. The decisive outcome is not a collapse, but a transformation. Governments, corporations, and individuals all begin operating with the knowledge that what they perceive might not be the full picture. This awareness spreads quietly into daily life, altering how decisions are made and how authority is viewed. By the end of the month, The world has adjusted to a new normal where certainty is replaced by cautious acceptance. Vought still functions, Homelander still flies, and people still go about their lives, but the foundation beneath all of it has shifted permanently. Aizen walks through a Vought corridor one afternoon, nodding politely to staff who greet him without hesitation. None of them realize that the greatest change he brought was not to their systems, but to their understanding of reality itself.